is a founder and CEO of the MBA, but Eva will tell you more about him later. At the beginning, I would just like to introduce our little group that is hosting this events. We're Amedea, Anna, Eva, and Tina, and we're hosting this these talks so we get to know the community, so you also get to know each other, so we can share and exchange knowledge, experiences, maybe even some opinions, and to, of course, chat a bit and grab a drink. So I hope you all have your drinks ready. So just a few rules. We kindly ask you to have your video cameras on so we see who we're talking to. During the talk, please have mics off so we won't be bothering Alan. If you have any kind of questions or whatever, write them in chat. We will check them later. And I guess that's it. Oh, at the end, we'll of course have a Q&A session. And yeah, I guess that's it from me. Eva, please continue.
Hey, so today we are hosting Alan. Alan Falic is the founder and CEO of the MBA. If you don't know what the MBA is, it's an online business program for design leaders. And I will post a link in the chat. So if you don't know it, go check it out. You will find some very cool content. Alan is also an ex-IDEO business designer, and he is he is also hosting the MBA podcast. He's talking with some really cool people there, and I think this is it, and the word goes to Alan.
Thank you. Let me just quickly try to share my screen so you can see what we'll talk about today. Okay, so just give me a thumbs up if you can hear and see my screen. You can. Perfect. Okay, so since Eva, you so nicely and kindly introduced me, we can dive straight into the topic. So those of you who have been in the design community for some time, you started to see the design and its role has changed recently. Fortunately, for the better, right? It's becoming more and more important in the business world. Companies are investing more and more in design and in designers as such. So this means that we are moving away from just aesthetical and conceptual work to more strategic level work, right? So our work, the design that we are creating, is directly tying and affecting the strategies of the companies we work with or for. So today, that's why I want to talk about strategic design, which basically goes into how do we have to, or how can we align the work that we do with the strategy of the company? Or if there is no strategy, how we can create the strategy. And you may be asking, why is this even important? Especially if you're new in the design world, you may know that, designers, we are great in the user empathy. We do user research, we understand what users want, and we deliver on that. But sometimes we overlook the business empathy. We overlook the business reality in which these problems, challenges, and design briefs are set. And that's what strategic design is trying to solve in a way, right? To bring out this another perspective so that these two perspectives can work together. So I have sliced this presentation into two parts, because first I think we need to go into what is strategy, and then I'll talk about strategic design. And basically, once we know what business strategy is, how can we use it strategically, how design can be used strategically. And I know we said before that the questions will be asked at the end, but if at any point you have a question, just feel free to unmute yourself, interrupt me. Maybe I need to clarify something because I haven't really rehearsed this presentation well. So maybe something is unclear. Just unmute yourself and feel free to ask me anything. Good. So let's get into it. So the first things first, as I said, we need to talk about business strategy. What is it? So the reason I want to start with this, and the reason we will spend probably 10 minutes just on this, is because this is one of the most commonly misused words, not just in business, but just in general, right? It's one of those words that everybody feels like they know what it means, but in reality, it's just being misused a lot of the time. So I want us to have the same and common understanding of what business strategy actually is. And we will do that. We will try to understand what business strategy is by looking at an example of competing strategies. So two strategies in an airline industry. So I chose airline industry because it's something that is pretty close to our lifestyles, and you may be able to easier understand the differences. Yeah. Okay. So as I said before, we will look at two different examples or two competing strategies in this space. So on the one side, we have companies like Lufthansa, British Airways, United Airlines, and they obviously have a completely different strategy than companies like Ryanair, EasyJet, AirAsia, and actually most famously known Southwest Airlines, which is not present in Europe, but it's where these low-cost airlines are coming from. So you may recognize the difference even just because of the prices, right? On one side, we have the premium airlines. On the other side, we have the low-cost airlines. And that's how strategies usually being translated into the value proposition is through price or maybe other things that are being offered to users, to customers, right? So on one side, what traditional airlines do is they have all kinds of premium features. So things like lounges, things like, like food and checked luggage is included in the price. There is more comfortable legroom, etc. And on the other side, the low-cost airlines, they take all kind of trade-off decisions to enable this low-cost value proposition. So this means that most famously, we are being cramped into the aircraft. So the legroom is much smaller. There is no food included in the price, you have to pay for it. There is no luggage included in price, you have to pay for that, etc. Right? So these are all kind of decisions, all kind of strategic decisions that these companies take in order to deliver on certain strategy, in order to deliver on certain value proposition. And I think the best way to explain this is maybe just through one very simple slide. And this is a slide which talks about the do's and don'ts of one of these low-cost carriers. So I'll go maybe a little bit just into the history of the low-cost airlines. So this actually started in the US with the Southwest Airlines. This is where this whole concept and strategy actually developed. And on this slide, we basically have their very, very basic strategy. And by understanding this strategy, you will start to understand any strategy of any company, because in its essence, it's just making decisions of what we will do and not do. So in the example of these low-cost carriers, low-cost companies, they've decided, to do certain things differently than the companies in the traditional bucket. One of the most interesting, yeah.
Alan, sorry, I will interrupt you because we see some presentation blinking. And maybe what we can do is like you quit the screen sharing and try it once again. And sorry to interrupt you.
No worries.
We were thinking it was like to catch our attention.
It could be just my old computer also. So does that work now?
Okay, it works now, but probably it will take a few minutes. Okay, let's just go on. Thank you.
So do you see the screen now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for example, like what the Southwest Airlines and other low-cost airlines do is a completely different set of activities than the traditional airlines. One of those decisions is that, for example, they only fly Boeing 737. Why is this interesting? Well, that's interesting because if you only fly with one aircraft, you need to spend less money on training your staff. Is it still blinking or is it working now?
Yeah, it's blinking again. I thought it will be okay, but it's
You know
still...
what I can do? I can pause the share. So
Okay.
now it's static, right?
No, it
So far,
is.
so good.
So far, so good.
So I will just pause every time I reach a new slide and then resume when I move on, okay?
Okay.
Right, okay, so to continue. I was talking about the aircraft, right? Just flying 737. This means that all crews are being trained on the same aircraft. And also because you're just buying one type of aircraft, you can negotiate a lower price, right? Which is not what traditional airlines do. They buy all kinds of aircraft for all different kinds of routes that they have. The second thing, the second very important strategic decision, and I will spend some time on this decision because it's one of those that really explains the difference, is this point-to-point departure compared to the hub and spoke system. So the easiest way to explain this is, imagine that you're trying to fly from Ljubljana to, let's say, Malaga, right? What's the usual way to fly there? Well, the usual way is you probably would buy a ticket with Lufthansa. So you would fly from Ljubljana to Munich or Frankfurt, and then from Frankfurt to your end destination, which is Malaga. Why? Because these are two not so famous airports, and they're being connected through what is called hub and spoke system, it's called, right? And that's why a lot of the times also when you're flying to the US, etc., you need to have this one stop in between unless you're flying directly from Munich or Frankfurt or another huge city. Well, what the low cost companies do is they fly point to point. This means they have eliminated hubs, right? And this is lowering their cost structure. So for example, if you think about flying, or maybe even a better example is flying from Ljubljana to Berlin. If you want to fly from Ljubljana to Berlin, if you go with Lufthansa, you need to have a stopover in Munich or Frankfurt. But if you fly with EasyJet, you go direct because that's their strategy. So you're faster and cheaper, right? So these companies are saving money and delivering a very, very specific value proposition because they've made this very specific trade-off decision. So they don't have point-to-point departure. They do have point-to-point departure and not hub and spoke system. Additionally, as I said before, they also decided to not give us food for free. It's for sale. And they're only selling their tickets direct to consumers, right? They're not selling through agents. So they're saving all this money so they can give it to us in the form of cheaper price. On the other side, traditional airlines, they do all kinds of additional things, which results in higher price. They offer lounges, they have hub and spoke system, they have food service. They also send your luggage to the end destination, which is not the case if you go with EasyJet and have a connection flight. You have to stop, take your baggage, go to the next flight. They have flying classes, etc. So all of this is trying to say one thing, which is that strategy is basically being very, very purposeful about choosing what you do and what you don't do, right? And now you can't see it. So can you see the next slide now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so I'll stop here again. And I think at the back, you can see some mountains because that's the easiest way you can understand what a strategy is. So strategy is a decision. For example, when you're climbing a mountain, you have to decide which mountain you're climbing. You cannot be climbing both mountains, right? Because then you're stuck in the middle. And this is the same thing for the companies. So if companies is trying to do two different things at the same time, they are failing. And strategy is basically all about making the decisions which force us to choose one or the other decision. So in a nutshell, basically strategic choices are only those choices that are either or choices. And that's all the strategy is. Once you understand this idea of trade-off decisions, you understand what strategy is. Most famously, how strategy is being misused, for example, by designers or design teams, is saying, hey, we will strategically use design thinking to deliver X, Y, and Z. Well, design thinking is not a strategy because it can be used by any team, right? It's not a trade-off, it's a tool on top, right? A trade-off is a decision that forces you to have one or the other option. If we go back to snacks on the airplane, you're either selling them or giving them away for free. You cannot sell them and give them away for free at the same time. So it's a trade-off, right? Let me give you another example. For this, I need to obviously go to the next slide. Okay, can you see this now?
Not yet, but yes. Yeah, now we see it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So this is an example from the bike industry. So usually the way bikes are made is the companies that we associate as bike brands is they don't really build all these bike parts. They have a frame, and on this frame, they order from other companies and assemble it together. You buy wheels from somebody, you buy brakes from another person, you buy seat from another company, and then you assemble it. And maybe sometimes you build one of these pieces on your own, right? And that's a strategy because it enables you to be fast in assembling a bike, and you outsource innovation for all of these little bits and pieces. How one company has decided to compete with that is by doing all of these pieces in-house, right? So a trade-off decision here was building ourselves or outsourcing. So VanMoof is this Dutch bike brand which has focused on commuter bikes, and all of these things that you see on this photo, they have built themselves. So they have built their light, they have built their not really gearbox, but the frame around the gearbox. They've built the light, they've built the bell and the lock. And what this enables is a lot of very, very unique value propositions.
Sorry,
if you think about the typical,
we see the black screen now.
It's still the same slide though.
Okay.
Do you see the VanMoof or no?
Maybe you paused it in the second when it was black. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
So that's the bike. Okay. So it's a beautiful integrated design where everything is in the frame. That's the interesting thing here, right? If you think about a typical bike, the parts are like bolted on top. And here everything is integrated in the frame. And this gives this bike many interesting value propositions, right? You cannot just take the light off. It cannot be stolen easily because of the integrated lock. And this is, by the way, one of the most interesting features of VanMoof is that you have a phone app. And then if your bike gets stolen, you can just click, remotely and disable it, and it stops working, right? So for the person who stole it, they cannot ride with it. And then usually a lot of these bikes are being retrieved back to their owners. So you can see how one strategic decision, which is, hey, we will build this in-house, led to a different value proposition. And again, it's a trade-off decision. Do we build it ourselves or do we outsource it? And this is just an example, right? Now we will go into the second part where we'll try to explain how you can do this for your own case. Okay, so I hope the business strategy is now clear what it is. I'll just repeat again. It's like climbing mountains. We're looking for the decisions in our design process that force us to make a trade-off decision, that force us to decide for X or Y. If a decision doesn't make us or doesn't force us to make one of these two choices, it's not a strategic choice, right? It's a tactical choice because you can add it on top of your design. Now, what strategic design is basically aligning with the already existing decision of your company. And most of the companies have already existing strategy, and it's our job to basically understand what that choice is, and just align with it, right? So we are trying to understand what the mountain is that our company is climbing, and then aligning our decisions, our design proposals, and design as such with that decision. So I'll give you a few more examples. So another example here is from a digital product from Google versus Apple, right? So for example, one of these trade-off decisions is distribution versus UX, or openness of the system with the quality of the system. So the way Google is competing on this market of smartphones is by making its operating system, so Android, compatible with all the different hardwares that are out there. That's why Google has 80 to roughly 90% of the market share. So this means for the designer working for Google, every decision that you make goes into, how can this be compatible with many different screen sizes, with many different hardwares, so it works well. On the other side, Apple has decided to play in this space by focusing on the product quality. So their market share is much, much lower. It's roughly 10 to 20%, but that's why the product quality is so much higher, because they can control the variables better, right? And to show you this with a very basic scheme, it's like this. So on one side, we have compatibility. On the other side, we have the UX, right? On one side, we have Google, which is competing with compatibility to reach high market share. On the other side, we have Apple, who has decided to not be compatible with different hardwares, but just to focus on a very premium experience. And that's strategy. We're looking for these decisions that force us to make trade-off, right? And in your role, you're trying to find what that thing is. And every product, every company, every service has this built in. We're trying to find what this thing is and which way our company is already leaning, so that our decisions and our design proposals go along with that. So this is maybe more digital example. Let's have a look at the example from the car industry, from product design. By the way, is it still blinking or is it working now?
It's working.
Okay. So this is a really famous or interesting example from the car industry, where a trade-off is...
But you didn't move to the next one. Sorry. It's still by the capacity speed one. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
That's the one.
That's right. It's right.
So what was I saying? So a fundamental trade-off that we have in the design of the car is, do we make it big or do we make it fast? And yes, you can try to do both, but that's the very idea of the mountains, right? If you try to make it both, you are stuck in between. And that by definition doesn't lead to the best value proposition or business results. So if you make a really huge car, you can put a lot of features in it. You can put, you can have a lot of space, etc. And then if you try to make it fast, you just, the more mass that you have in the car, the slower its acceleration will be. And the interesting thing about this example is that you find a lot of success in the car industry exactly in these extremes. So on one side, we have Porsche, which is the most profitable car automotive company. And on the other side, we have the best-selling car in the US for the last probably 50 years, Ford F-150. So that's a pickup truck, for those who don't know. It's a huge, huge car, and like with all the features that you can imagine, right? So that's the basic trade-off here, capacity versus speed. Another example, maybe more from the service perspective, from the service world, is this trade-off between open education and closed education. So on one side, we have a company like Udemy. On the other side, we have a school like Harvard. So Udemy, all for open education, very low prices, open for everyone, but there is no structure. So hardly anyone finishes a course. And this means much lower impact. On the other side, Harvard, super, super premium, super, super expensive, but that's why it has more impact. For those people who go through it, they actually finish the course, they get certain certifications, and it leads to higher salaries, all of that stuff. But at the same time, it's very exclusive because of its price. So that's how the trade-off is built into this decision. So I hope all of these examples show, again, that strategy is all about making trade-offs, and that we as designers have to recognize this trade-off and basically then align our decision with that. And that's kind of summarized also in this slide. So whenever you are working with a new client, or even if you're in-house, the idea is that you try to recognize the fundamental trade-off decisions that are already baked into the process. And then usually there are more of them. It's not just one, but you try to find the most fundamental one. And then you want to align your design, your proposal with that. If there is no strategy, if you see that company is lacking that, you can help, say, hey, we need to focus here. And the way we can do that is by conducting, business and user research to gain insights about which of these trade-offs make more sense from the user perspective. And the way you can do that is by maybe testing different scenarios, by testing different wireframes, testing different, for cars, it could be just, sketches of the cars, trying to understand what trade-off are users willing to make. And that puts us on a trajectory of one of these two choices. Good. So I hope that kind of explains the whole part, but we'll have Q&A also later for further clarifications. I just wanted to share two more books that could help you dive deeper into this topic. One of them is Business Strategy. It's called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which goes into many more examples of exactly this: trade-off decisions, how do you recognize when a strategy needs to change. And another one is Blue Ocean Strategy, which has a really cool tool called Strategy Canvas, which is a really cool way to visualize the strategy of a company, which also helps us then understand what company is doing and how to align our decision with it. So that's it from my side. Questions?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. So did you ever try to use the Blue Ocean Strategy, like the toolkit that they provide?
Yep.
And what was your experience?
Do you have experience with it, so I know where I should tackle it, or did you ever try to use it?
I tried parts of it, not the whole thing. I'm studying, so we had to read the book and analyze it and use parts of it. And I was just wondering, how did you use it? Like, how long did the process take? Like, if you could give an example.
So for those unfamiliar, maybe just go on Google and type in Strategy Canvas or Blue Ocean Canvas, so you know what I'm talking about. But Anna, I mean, this is how I'd usually use. I would jump straight to this canvas, and I would try to understand in this space what are companies investing in, what trade-off decisions they're making. So the first thing in that project would be to visualize big 2 or 3 strategic groups in this place, and to understand how my client, my company is competing against that, right? For example, when we were designing the MBA, you look at alternatives, and alternatives for the MBA, one example is a book, a business book. You can buy a book and you can read something about business. Another strategic option for you is to take traditional MBA, right? And I just sketched investments of a book and a traditional MBA on this graph. And this showed me what maybe the MBA can reduce investments on, and what we can invest more in, right? We knew that we had to be more interactive than a book and more flexible than a traditional MBA. So the canvas is the starting point. You try to visualize what's there, and then usually you have to find one cornerstone, one fundamental trade-off decision, such as speed versus space, or privacy versus social features, or it's human touch versus total automatization, it's premium price versus cheap price. You try to find that main feature. And it's great for visualizing, but then apart from that, you need to go into your usual toolkit as designer and just visualize the trade-off and test it with users.
We have a question from Osvaldo. I hope I pronounce it correctly. Is that canvas similar to a value curve?
Value curve. Well, let me look up what value curve is.
Or if Osvaldo wants to speak, he can maybe explain.
Oh yeah, that's
what
exactly
he's thinking.
It, Osvaldo. Value curve is a component on the strategy canvas. It is the line that you draw on the canvas to show what companies invest in. So yeah, that's it.
I have a question, if I can.
Of course.
Thanks for the talk. When you were talking about cars, the thing you said, like Ford has space and the Porsche is about speed. So I thought that's really interesting because what Porsche did was they then released the SUV, which became like a huge success, and that's basically going against their strategies, if I understand you correctly. So can you maybe talk about that as an example of what went there from the business strategic point of view?
Yeah. So what I wanted to do is show you strategy on different levels. I mean, one is like top level strategy. In this case, we're talking about product design decision on like strategic product design decision. And my point was that a lot of the success lies in these borders, you know, like in extremes, super private, super open, small, huge. What inevitably happens is that companies try to cover a certain range of these things, right? But even with the SUV, if you look at the way they try to build the SUV, even this SUV needs to be lighter and smaller than an SUV that doesn't have the same expectations for acceleration, for speed, right? Ford F-150 don't really care about the weight. They just need to provide a space. When you're buying the SUV from Porsche, they expect you expect to have the fastest SUV that's out there. So you can look at this even within the category. Within the category of SUVs, you can see this difference. And this results usually in higher price because you can try to find this you try to find these things in between, and this usually like means in this case lighter materials, and lighter materials are expensive, so that increases the price of the car.
Yeah, that makes sense. But what happens if like you make a strategic decision and it turns out like that it goes in a different way than you imagined? Like if it's like a big decision that's a huge success, do you then shift the company strategy, or how do you tackle such situations?
That's a very, very big question. So I'll just try to maybe narrow it down a little bit to is a strategy something that you change often or not? And I'll try to answer this. And if that doesn't answer your question, then you can just follow up with something. But when you set a strategy, this is not a decision that's being changed often, right? You're trying to set a tone for the decisions that you will take in the future, because this one decision of a trade-off has so many effects on other things. It just trickles down to everything else. So it's very rarely it happens that you have a company who is changing all the time. So what you do usually is you try to test strategy before you commit to it. You create a smaller version of that future of that decision, and you test it with users, you test it on the business side before you fully commit to it. How could that look like is by maybe creating a different type of product, releasing it, and seeing does that go, or maybe like a lot of big companies try to create smaller spin-offs, and with that they test a certain strategy, and that if that works, then they try to also bring it into the big company.
Yeah, that makes sense. But if I go back to the Porsche case, because I think it's really interesting in this way, is when they decided to release the SUV, there was a lot of negative and bad feedback about I won't buy Porsche anymore because it's not a speed brand and they're making SUVs and stuff like that. And they basically went against that. Turned out great, but what do you think about that?
What I think about the decision, I mean, ultimately it all comes down to did it work or not. I think Porsche as a brand, even if, as I said before, even if they went into the SUV, they had to do it the Porsche way. They couldn't do it, like Renault or Ford would. People just have certain expectations of that. But I think what you're trying to ask is like, what happens when a company tries to do two strategies at the same time? Is that the question that you have?
Yeah, maybe they try to go outside of their current strategy, maybe expand to a new field that actually kind of clashes with the current strategy. Like it makes sense, but still somehow it clashes with the current strategy.
In this case, I again wouldn't say that it really clashes with the strategy, because Porsche didn't commit to just making small cars. They commit to making sports cars. And this, by definition, means you have to take a certain trade-off of creating a smaller car to make it faster, right? So as again, like within this category of only SUVs, it still works. I think the question is what happens when you try to do when you try to follow two different strategies on the top company level. So for example, imagine Porsche trying to sell super fast, expensive cars and super cheap cars. Mm-hmm. That wouldn't work, because that's a fundamental trade-off that you have to take as a brand. Are you more premium or are you more affordable, right? You don't go to IKEA expecting to buy the most expensive furniture that's out there. You go there with the expectation that it's affordable. And that's exactly what happened in the airline industry. And I forgot to mention this. When Southwest Airline came out, what happened? All the traditional airlines decided to copy them. Like, hey, let's do the same. Let's also lower the prices. Let's not offer food. Let's not offer checked luggage, etc. And that just didn't work. Why? Because if you try to do both things at the same time, you cannot. Let me explain in this example why. So you have the cost structure of a more expensive company, right? You have hub and spoke system. You are still giving away food on to certain customers, but not to others. So you're not really saving time, because you still need to hire people who prepare food. You need to send luggage for certain clients, but not for others, because now you have half clients who are not paying for that, but half who are. But that by definition means you still need those employees who take care of that. So you cannot offer the low price anymore, and you don't have the brand of the premium one. So if you look back to the history, what happened is all of these companies failed with this strategy. And funnily enough, Southwest Airlines was the only airline to be profitable for 47 consecutive years until COVID hit. So they were unprofitable now for a year. But also now in, I think just this quarter, the first quarter in 2021, they're the first airline to come out of this crisis with some profit.
Alan, if I may add to his question, so one of the ways, and please correct me if I'll be wrong in my statement. So one of the ways that car companies, for example, go around this issue of pursuing two strategies is to create consortiums behind the brand. So each brand is specific for something, right? But from background, they could actually tackle different markets. But that's behind the brands, not each brand representing everything, right?
It's a great point. Exactly. Yeah. By having a different company, different structure, then you can follow a different strategy within the same company. It's almost impossible to do that.
Okay. One more question. It's connected like to this Porsche discussion. And the question is the strategy in this case also quite connected to branding? For example, Porsche is known for fast cars, but they also make big cars that are less known.
That are less what? That
are less known. But like the case is strategy in this case also quite connected to branding?
It can be. I mean, because one of the very basic strategic decisions is, are you low cost or are you premium? So, and then that becomes the part of the branding, right? It becomes part of the story that you want to tell. Are you expensive? Do you want to invest a lot in the quality, and then this shows in the price, or really try to make all kind of trade-off decisions to be cheaper? So that shows in the brand. Another way maybe the branding shows is also the way you talk about your product. So for example, if you look at a lot of schools, right? So schools can talk about their brand, can talk about themselves. You know, hey, we have the best teachers, we have the best product, etc. Or the brand can talk about their students. You know, push the students to the forefront. And if you actually look at this as a trade-off, right? What happens if you really just talk about the students and push them to the forefront? The whole brand can change. And it has a lot of implications on what kind of content you create, what things you communicate, versus if you talk about how great your teachers are. So even in the branding, there are a lot of these trade-off decisions, but it's not just the branding, right? Because it's ultimately about the investments. It's because there's a finite amount of resources and you need to invest in certain things. And it's just making these decisions. So I'm trying to think of maybe another example as maybe as a freelancer, you know, as a freelancer, you have, let's say 8 hours per day that you're working on your actual client and trying to find new clients. If you will spend 8 hours a day looking for the new clients, you maybe won't finish the project that you're working on. I mean, that's a very simple trade-off, right? So you're trying to find the right balance there. And in this case, the trade-off is your time. And these are all the decisions. These are the type of decisions that we're looking for when talking about strategy and when talking about aligning design decisions with strategy.
Great, thanks.
Welcome.
So does anyone have another question?
I have one more if no one else wants to ask. This is a different question, not about cars anymore. How do you go about recognizing strategic decisions of a client?
Mm-hmm. One is to just try to talk to them, you know, just ask them, what is your strategy? What you will see is that a lot of the times they also don't know, especially if it's smaller companies. It's just a term that's not being used correctly and thought of correctly, unfortunately. But the way to do it is to maybe not even talk about it, but just try to uncover it. So when you are on the project, you're looking for these trade-off decisions. I hope this is the word that's coming back and back again, trade-offs, right? So we're looking for the trade-offs that the company has made. And then just see, has this company consciously decided to do one thing and not the other? And once you understand this, then you know which way you have to go. And this is usually part of the process that we call business empathy, which is the first part of the project that you have with a client is just talking to them for, you know, having interviews in-house with the CEO, with the managers, with people actually working on the project and asking them about, hey, what are you trying to achieve? What are your goals? What are your obstacles? What are the KPIs? What have you already tried? What decisions have you already tried? What decisions have you considered and said no to? That's a really nice question, because then you see what things they're trying not to do, because that's at the core of the strategy, is saying no to things. And that's one of the biggest problems in the business world, is companies try to do too many things and you say no to nothing, and then they try to be everything to everybody and you're nothing to nobody. And that's the basic idea of strategy, is try to figure out what things you will not do so you can do some things better. So business empathy, interviews, research, and just thinking about the trade-offs is the best way to identify what those are. And just think about opposites, you know, when you hear a word like privacy, what is opposite of it? On the opposite side of that word, and then you try to figure out, is this product clearly standing for one of these two decisions?
Yeah, makes sense. I would maybe add here that sometimes the client or the representative of the client isn't always aligned with the kind strategy. So basically, if they have like a manager who wants to just finish the project as fast as he can with as low cost as possible, that doesn't actually represent what the company stands for, maybe.
Yeah, and that's internal issues with that. But here we shouldn't mix the strategy with like budgets and resources. Strategy is not always expensive. It's just having a clear point of view. If you think about a lot of companies that you really love, they have a very strong point of view. You know, they don't do certain things, and that's why you like them. And they're very clear about what they don't do. I think that's maybe the easiest way to start recognizing these examples in your life. And maybe even if you just like now in the chat, write a few brands that all of you like, you will start seeing this pattern. They have a very clear idea, very clear trade-offs that they have taken in order to get there.
And just to jump in, I think one thing to kind of start discovering these strategic activities would also be just to do a bit of a research and to figure out for which industry are you doing it and what are the biggest players in this industry. And I think if you just type it in the Google, I think you will already find some blue ocean canvases and get some strategic activities, maybe just to start with, right? What are the most important ones for one industry?
Hey, Alan, I have a question.
Hey, Manny.
Hey, how's it going, man?
Hey,
I've
good.
done the course. It's amazing. I highly recommend it, first of all. In terms of the output of what a strategy should be, what are you presenting to the company? When you actually go into the company with the process, or you've co-created it with the company, what should the document look like? What should the project look like? What should the proposal look like? Should it be a hypothesis, or should it be a slide deck, or is there a set document that companies, I know every company is not going to be the same, but is there a way to present it in the most attractive way that makes the most sense?
Yeah, there is. Can we stop recording and I'll tell you? I'm serious.
Yeah, we can pause it.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's more of an insights-based, narrative-based idea that it's like a big idea, it's like an advertising big idea as opposed to a whole business case or whatever that you're trying to present.
Yes. So it's literally, imagine a slide like we had in the presentation, and it's, you know, split in between, like in the middle, and you say yes, and you write what you want to do, and you say no to something that looks obvious and it's actually a bad idea. And why it's a bad idea, you have to back this up with user quotes, with customer interviews, with business rationale, with technology rationale. And you have to be very clear what you don't do and very clear about what you do. That's strategy.
Alan, would you say that it's more important to back up what you should do or back up what you shouldn't do with quotes and everything you just mentioned?
Usually you have to be stronger on the not to do side first, because we have to go maybe 2 steps back. It's a psychology of founders, psychology of companies is to do whatever is working. And whatever is working for somebody else means you're climbing the mountain of somebody else because somebody's already there and it looks profitable. So you're like, oh, let me try to go there. So it's obvious. So you need to explain why this is not so obvious and why it's bad. So usually in the first step of the strategy, you have to explain the not to do side. And to do side is more like you need some directional certainty, a few quotes, some business rationale, because this side needs to be tested anyway, further with MVPs on the market, etc. But usually this side is much more important. And even if you go through the book Blue Ocean Strategy and just read the cases, they're phenomenal. You will see this over and over again. The strategy starts with a really interesting idea of what not to do. Like going back to airlines hub and spoke system.
Yeah, thank you.
I would have a question for you, Alan.
Sure.
So I am working in a business, in a IT company. We're having some business development. We're having our own design team of like a lot. I think we're 11 UX UI designers. and about 30 developers, 40. And I'm interested very much in the first stages of company getting in touch with like a client getting in touch with us, and in those first workshops, so very much in that strategic part of the UX in the first steps. I was wondering how much is this DMBA also would be suitable for me if I would like to go more in that direction, and how much is it also focused on the UX design, and I could also use it later on in my professional work if I would want to go with my career path in that direction.
That sounds like a really bad product placement for the question, but I can maybe tell you later more about the MBA. But in general, to answer maybe like a more broad question is like the business skills that we talk about, the business fundamental skills are just something that every designer needs regardless of the position. There used to be this mindset that design is about aesthetics, about art. I, for one, think that's not true. I think it's more about solving problems. But if you're in this bucket of designing, solving problems, then especially if you are working within a business context, which most of us are, business empathy, business understanding is just a fundamental skill that design schools should teach, but they don't. And it just covers really basic things like understanding the business model of your company, of your client, understanding strategy, as we talked today, understanding numbers, understanding industries, etc. And it's hard to pinpoint why that's important. I tried to maybe show one example today, but it just gives you like a better understanding of the space in which you design. And that's the basic idea, is that you have more confidence that your design actually is aligned with the business reality, and it's easier for the client to take it on. So regardless of your seniority or discipline, I think you should all open a business book and go into that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have one more question from Xenia, and the question goes: do you have any examples of strategy decision based on UX or design, not only cost reduction or market development?
Only UX. At the end, it always comes to an investment. Even the UX is investment. I mean, just to give you an example, what comes to mind is N26, so number 26. If you think about there, right, they have a premium banking, digital banking experience, at least compared to the traditional old school banks. But in order to be able to invest in this premium UX, in the premium product, they had to cut costs elsewhere. Where did they cut them? No retail presence. Retail presence is very, very, very expensive. By cutting money there, you can invest in developers, you can invest in designers. And by the way, it's for free. And having a free checking account is a price, you know? I mean, it's part of this, the reason the fact that we reduced costs on the retail presence means we can invest in a lower price. So it always is very interconnected decision. And it will be a little bit hard for me now on the spot to come up with just UX. Because a lot of the times it comes from really basic, really fundamental business top level decisions of what we invest in.
Okay, thank you very much. This was a very good example. So we will take one more question and then we will wrap it up. So if anyone has...
Yeah, can I go there? Sorry, I have some technical issues with my camera. So I cannot actually put it on, but well, following up question, Alan, I think it's very interesting what you're saying. Actually, I'm a big fan of what you do. I kind of a business designer also. And this is more a question based on what you said about the example you gave. When you found out with the client you were working on, when you said we are not A, we're now B, and this is now how B is going to look like, and we're going to focus the product on this new proposal. My question goes, so you know, when you go after the whole discovery process, it's really interesting because every time you go to a different interview, to a different, I don't know, artifact, it's like you get deeper, right? You came from just Googling what exists in the street doing, from actually getting the input from the customers and whatever you start understanding from that side. But at what point is that discovery enough, right? To say we're now B. So let's stop getting deeper of what we're going to build or what is we're going to do. We're now B, and that's it. Let's go to here. Let's now thinking about how we're going to build this new proposal.
Yeah, I think this is the question in life. How are you sure that something works or not? And I mean, I think the example that I gave was very much in the discovery phase. And in this phase, we cannot have certain answers. What we want to have is directional certainty. It's like, this does not work. And that's directional certainty. Like, it's at least knowing what doesn't work. It's much better than what most people have. So it really depends on the stage you're in. If you're like in this discovery, early stage, innovation, blue sky thinking stage, you just need directional certainty. And for that, usually having certain projections of how the market is developing, certain user quotes. If you have an experiment that you run, that's already amazing, but that's already enough to show directional certainty, because what's going to happen next is you will test that over and over and over again. It's a typical thing with, if you think about the involvement of a startup, is they start with a very basic fundamental premise of an idea of what they stand for. And then they, over time, are testing it. And each time they prove something, they get more money from investors. And it's the same thing here, right? When you are, let's say that you're coming up with a new product idea, like what you can build is like these stages in almost like a startup stages. And in each stage, you're saying, hey, I'm now testing this, and please give me only enough resources to test this thing. And then once you prove this thing, you can say, okay, now I've proven this. I have this question. Now I need more resources. So like your investments are going up because also your risk is going down because you know more. So it's just about creating a journey for the client and for yourself where you're de-risking yourself and knowing very well in which stage you are. If it's a very early stage, you cannot know.
Okay, great.
Okay, so I will thank Alan for very, very great lecture and great examples, but this is not the end yet. So the word goes back to Tina.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Alan. Just two little formalities from me. Okay, do you see my screen? Cool. Okay, so as always, we kindly ask you to take our survey. We always check your answers. We really appreciate them. So we know what you didn't like, what you liked. So we know what can we make better, and you know the drill. The survey is very, very short. It will only take a few minutes. So please check that. I think we will put the link in the chat, so you can go there. Okay, so yeah, the season actually is slowly coming to an end, but we still have one more talk, and this is the talk in June. We will be hosting Jesse Grims. Jesse is also with us today, I think. Okay, this will be in the second part of June on the 17th, and he will be talking about service design in startups. So come check us. Okay, this is it from me.